Today we're going to look at the impacts of the Wall Street crash in 1929. The Wall Street crash followed years of economic advancement during the Roaring Twenties. Many Americans spent a lot of their savings buying up stock on the stock market in hopes that the price of the stock would rise and they could sell it for a higher price later down the line. After a while, people started to realise that this might not actually continue to rise in price, and people started to worry that the price that they bought the stock for would plummet to worthlessness. This meant people started to panic and sell their stock at a very, very high rate. This caused other people to panic and sell theirs, which led to a knock-on effect where everyone was scrambling to get their money back. Now, the banks couldn't cope with handing out this much money at the same time, which meant that a lot of people didn't get the money at all. It led to widespread panic and caused the stock market to completely plummet, meaning most stocks were completely worthless. Most people lost all of their money and most of their savings. The President of America at the time of the crash was called Herbert Hoover, who was later nicknamed Hopeless Hoover because of his approach to the Wall Street crash and the effects that came after, which later became known as the Great Depression. He was president from 1929 till 1933. Which was the first 4 years, essentially, of the Great Depression. Now, his attitude towards the Great Depression was, it is not the government's problem. The people got themselves into this situation, the people can get them out. Now, this was because of the party that he belonged to, which was the Republican Party. They believed in an idea called laissez-faire, which basically meant people look after themselves, not the government's responsibility. The government stays out of people's way. Therefore, he didn't actually put much stuff in place to help the people that were being affected by the Wall Street crash. For example, today in Britain, we have housing, like government housing, government benefit, and so on. There was none of that in America at the time. If you lost your job and you lost your house, then you were in huge trouble. You were homeless and you were going to starve. Right? People started making, shacks and shanty towns in the middle of, disused, fields and so on, which later became known as Hoovervilles, which was a little bit of a dig at Herbert Hoover as a way of saying we are living in these awful conditions because you can't be bothered to help us. The main problem caused by the Wall Street crash was the widespread depression that came afterwards. This mostly took the form of a loss of jobs, loss of homes, loss of savings, widespread poverty and homelessness, and starvation. Now, this was mostly because of the laissez-faire attitude that the Republican government took towards the Depression at the time, as I mentioned in the previous slide. This was the idea of leave people to their own devices. Now, people were losing jobs, and they were losing their homes, and they were losing their savings, because most of the people who were involved in the stock market and involved in Wall Street were big companies, right? Employers. When they lost all of their money, that meant they couldn't afford to employ all of their workers, meaning they had to sack off workers wherever they could to save money. This meant there was mass unemployment, and unemployment shot through the roof. This meant that people couldn't afford to pay their mortgages on their homes, which led to them becoming homeless. They couldn't, afford to buy food, and the government wasn't going to help them. Now, on top of this, a lot of the banks were involved in Wall Street. Now, the banks played a bit of a sneaky game, really. They took a lot of the people's savings who would, trusted them to look after it and thought, tell you what, we can use these people's savings, invest it in the stock market, and we can make loads of money for ourselves. So they invested a lot of these people's savings back into the stock market. Only thing was, after the Wall Street crashed, that meant that they couldn't get the savings back, meaning people who had trusted their entire life savings to these banks found out they had nothing, absolutely nothing left. To make matters worse, there was also another huge problem for Americans called the Dust Bowl. In the centre of America, where a lot of the farms in America were located, there was a very hot summer in which a lot of the ground dried up and became quite brittle and dusty. Huge winds then swept into the middle of America, which got all the dust and swept them up into huge dust clouds, which then, blew across the country and started, covering many different farms and so on. Now, this was a spectacular sight, as you can see on the PowerPoint, but also it was incredibly dangerous for the farmers because they couldn't grow vegetables and crops when there was huge clouds of dust basically choking all the plants. So a lot of the plants died and the farmers couldn't grow anything to sell. This resulted in a lot of farmers abandoning their farms because this dust bowl went on for a long time, and they migrated to other areas of America in hopes of finding work. Now, obviously, they weren't the only people looking for work at the time, because everyone else was looking for work, right? Because people had lost their savings, companies had lost all their money, companies couldn't afford to, continue to employ a lot of people, so just sacked people off left, right and centre after the Wall Street crash. Now, because the farmers weren't making food, this also added to the problem, because there was reduced food supplies and increased poverty, so it just added to the problem.